Alright guys, what's going on? Welcome in. So in this one, I wanted to really do a video on one of my favorite draft prospects in this entire class and why I feel like he would make sense for the New York Jets. It's wide receiver from LSU, Brian Thomas Jr. Now look, I get it, right? The Jets have the 10th overall pick. Still, we're literally less than a week away and I still have not seen a mock draft with Brian Thomas going as high as spot number 10. Still, I have not seen one. So on the surface, I definitely understand it if it's weird to take him at spot number 10, or to talk about Brian Thomas with the New York Jets and not factoring in a trade down, right? Is 10 too high of a pick? But this is my kind of take when it comes to Brian Thomas. I feel like, well, first of all, he's being mocked right now around like the mid-teens. So like I could make an argument for New Orleans going after him at spot number 14. Although I feel like they should really target offensive line and maybe go wide receiver later in the draft. But I digress. I think the Jaguars make a ton of sense for Brian Thomas. I think realistically, too, that's probably where he's going to end up. I think Cincinnati makes a lot of sense. I also think Buffalo and a potential trade up. They have 10 picks in this year's class, along with that future, too, from the Stephon Diggs trade. So I really don't want to see Buffalo trade up and snag Brian Thomas here in the middle of, in the middle of round one. I also don't think that the Cowboys would be a bad fit either. CeeDee Lamb's holding out from camp. You have Michael Gallup, who was just released from Dallas. Dallas is obviously win now. I think Brian Thomas will make a lot of sense for them, although I don't necessarily feel like he will be there or fall that far. But anyway, you're looking at Brian Thomas. Would it be a reach to draft him for the Jets at spot number 10? I gotta be honest, I don't think so. I really don't think so. Now, look, I could be biased here because I am a big fan of him as a prospect. I guess, I'm higher on Thomas than most people are because I would consider him at spot number 10 if I am the Jets. I think Brian Thomas gives an NFL offense a bunch of rare traits all in one. I think he would give the Jets a nice combination of size, speed, explosion, yards after catch, as well as potential, right? Because I don't feel like Brian Thomas is a finished product. I still feel like he has so much room to grow, especially as a route runner. Now, it's not to say that he's a bad route runner. Obviously not. Looking at the production in the SEC a year ago, absolutely nuts, and we're going to get into it. But I feel like just as the practices, as the weeks, as the years go by, Brian Thomas is just going to get more refined, more polished as a route runner, and I feel like that just the sky's the limit for him as an NFL player. He kind of reminds me of an old school player, an old school NFL wide receiver, where they're bigger, they make plays deep down the field, and they're just very, very hard, very difficult to guard against, right? If you're a corner, if you're a safety coming over, it's just a wide receiver, in my opinion, he doesn't have a lot of weak spots. So I guess we could kind of break down each one of those points, right? So let's talk about the size first, right? The size is really, really good, especially when we combine that with the speed. He's 6'3", 210 pounds, but runs a 4.33 40. At 6'3", 210, this dude's running a 4.3 40. I mean, that is insanity. That is crazy. And I guess to just kind of jump right into the speed aspect of it, he was a deep threat for LSU. I mean, time after time after time, he would just instantly get right behind a corner and shoot down the field, and Jaden Daniels would find him. Right? I felt like it happened weekly. I mean, he was a touchdown machine. The production that Brian Thomas had a year ago was mind-blowing. 12 starts, over 1,100 receiving yards with 17 touchdowns. He averaged 90 receiving yards per game. By the way, as the wide receiver too, he wasn't even the focal point of the offense. He was the secondary option to, top 10 pick here, Malik Neighbors, or future top 10 pick, rather. Now, granted, you can push back at me and say, all right, well, of course his numbers are going to be inflated. They had the Heisman winner, top 3 pick probably, in Jaden Daniels at quarterback. And Malik Neighbors was there to take pressure off of Brian Thomas to where, the defense couldn't fold his way, that he wouldn't get a lot of, help over the top, corners wouldn't get a lot of help over the top because everybody was focused on Neighbors. But if you watch LSU's offense, it's just a well-oiled machine. Everybody knew exactly where to be. You could tell they're well coached. They really knew how to exploit defenses. And it just felt like everything every week was firing on all cylinders, maybe outside of the Florida State game in week 1, which was, week 1. So, of course, there's no time to really grow outside of the offseason and the previous year, where Brian Thomas didn't really have that much playing time. But again, I digress. You look at Brian Thomas from a speed aspect, from a deep threat aspect. I don't think it's a stretch to say he would be the best deep threat on the New York Jets. I think with a healthy Mike Williams, Brian Thomas would probably still be the team's best deep threat. I think if the Jets want to get back to running the football and working off of play action, with the healthy Aaron Rodgers coming back, thinking about the Jets actually taking shots down the field this year gets me fired up. It's just something that we just didn't really do a year ago. And it was super frustrating, right? It really felt like we played within a 15-yard box offense, this weird like brick wall, 10 to 15 yards from the line of scrimmage, where it was almost like the Jets were playing with like these unwritten rules or like these personal handicaps where, all right, guys, we have to have everything in front of the line of scrimmage, but we can't go beyond that 10, 15, 20-yard mark down the field. We have to keep everything contained. And defense has picked up on that early in the season. If we can talk about it as a fan, watching that play out weekly, defensive coordinators that have been around the game for years can sniff that out, no question about it. We just didn't have the personnel, we didn't have the play caller, we didn't have the protection up front, and of course, you can make an argument we didn't really have the quarterback play to do that. I would still attempt to try. Right, if I was Hackett, I would still call shots down the field. So at least you're putting the thought in defensive coordinators' minds, okay, and also corners and safeties' minds, because if they're playing on their front foot and they don't have to play on their heels, and they kind of, 95% of the time are thinking, all right, everything is going to be underneath, everything is going to be in front of us. It's going to be super, super easy to adjust, especially throughout the course of the game. It's going to be easy to react. It's just a nightmare. It's just a complete nightmare. But if you have receivers stretching the field, taking this top off the defense, right, really trying to extend those safeties, I think just even if those passes are all incomplete, you're creating this idea in the secondary's heads. Okay, we can do this, and we will try to do this. So you can't play, you can't creep up to the line of scrimmage. You can't react post snap to where, all right, these guys aren't going behind me. I'm not going to fall for the moves. I know these guys are going to cut inside or cut to the perimeter. So I think in that aspect, Brian Thomas would be a humongous upgrade. So again, he provides size at 6'3", 210. He provides speed, the 4.3, 340. And I know that's just, a 40 time. We've seen, 40 time doesn't necessarily translate to in game, but if you go back and watch LSU or even just Brian Thomas highlights, I'm sure you'll see the speed on full display. Point number 3 is the explosion, right? The explosion off the line, whether that's beating a corner, whether that is, again, the 4.3 speed, whether it's yards after catch, this guy is he's explosive. And one thing about the Jets offense last year is that it was not explosive, right? We had a couple plays where Garrett Wilson would break free on a slant and take it to the house right against Dallas. Breece Hall, I feel like, is the team's most explosive player by far. And we've seen him make plays in the passing game, especially year one, like the wheel route to, or Zach Wilson wheel route to Breece against Denver. There's multiple instances where you can point to Breece Hall breaking through the trenches and just taking it the distance, right? There's so many areas of Breece Hall's game, or so many moments where you can go back and point to, but not really anybody else. I'm talking real NFL explosion, right, on a consistent basis, where fans of other teams can say, "Oh, that's a really explosive player." Brian Thomas brings that to the Jets offense. He could hurt defenses with or without the football in his hands. He can get open. And that kind of brings me to my next point, the separation skills. This to me, along with hands, right, is it's so important in my opinion, right? Brian Thomas for me is the number 3 wide receiver in this class. And the reason why I hold him in such a high regard is his separation abilities. He can break free from corners. He can break free from secondary members. He can create breathing room by himself, and he doesn't need to be schemed open. I know the numbers might be similar, but there's a difference between somebody like A.J. Brown, somebody like Jamar Chase, somebody like Justin Jefferson, compared to like a Deebo Samuel or a Puka Nacua, right? Where one group of those wide receivers are creating separation. It doesn't really matter who they're going up against. It doesn't really matter the play call. They can go out there and just win on the outside. Whereas the Nakuas of the world, the Deebo Samuels, we can talk about other receivers as well. They're more so, and it's not to say every single snap, right? It's not a shot at all, but those guys do rely on the scheme, right? They're schemed open to a degree. Again, not every single time, but there's a lot of benefits there. Where you can put A.J. Brown on the Dolphins, you can put A.J. Brown on the Jets, you can put A.J. Brown on the Jags, on the Patriots, and he's going to find ways to win. He's going to find ways to get numbers. He's just that good. Of course, same with Jamar and some other receivers in football. But Brian Thomas kind of has that ability to me, where he's not going to be scheme reliant, where he's going to be a gadget type of player. No, you draft him, he's going to be big, fast, athletic enough, explosive enough to go out there and dominate NFL corners. He can create that separation by himself, which I think is so important. And I do think there is something to contested catches. I love contested catches. Mike Williams is a contested catch machine, but I think if you can't separate at the NFL level, you might run into some issues, right? Mike Williams is a good combination of both, right? Somebody who can separate, but somebody who can win at contested catches. If you can't break free from corners, or where they're putting their number one corner on you, or whatever it is, the number two corner, and they're sending a lot of help that way, and you just can't get open. And I will say it's a trait that you can get better at, but I think if you can go out there and consistently separate on a weekly basis, not to mention in the SEC at LSU. So he's going up against 4- and 5-star corners pretty much, not every time, but on a weekly basis. I mean, there is carryover there. I mean, there's moments where Brian Thomas gets off the line and he gets a half step to a step beyond that corner. If they're far enough down the field, right, where the safety doesn't have enough time to get over, or if it's just one-on-one coverage on the outside, the play's over. Like, literally, in that half second to second, when Thomas gets beyond that corner, plays over. Jaden Daniels just has to lob it deep, and Thomas is going to go track it down. I mean, it's seriously that insane. So I think, again, factoring Brian Thomas's role within the Jets offense, the things that he can bring, sorry about the glare, by the way, I feel like he'd be a great fit. And, of course, you look to the NFL draft and you make the argument, all right, well, is he worth the 10th overall pick? What if he's worth the 13th pick? Or what if he's Joe Douglas's 15th player on his big board? Do you reach on a guy like that? Again, personally, I am factoring team need into this. O-line, wide receiver, Brock Bowers, right? I think all these different guys can help this football team out tremendously. I'm not necessarily... I understand that the draft isn't all about need, but I'm not necessarily thinking, all right, we got to stick to the big board. What if Dallas Turner is the 4th best player in this class, according to Joe Douglas? Are we going to take him? I would just disagree with that. I think team need is massive for the win now New York Jets. So if I'm Douglas, I'm considering Brian Thomas. I know that might be a little... Again, a bit of a reach here, considering draft position, but I love him, and he's one of my favorite draft prospects. I think he's going to be a really good NFL pro, and I would love to see him with the New York Jets. So anyway, thanks so much. And by the way, based off of Joe Douglas's recent, or really comments throughout the offseason, I kind of get the sense, like how it's coming off to me, the Jets will be targeting a pass catcher, like wide receiver. I'm thinking wide receiver is the team's number one choice here. The way Douglas has talked about this offensive line, he talks about it like it's done, it's complete, it's there's no more work to be done. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm still trying to add to the offensive line. I'm still offensive line in round one. That's kind of where I'm leaning. But again, I'm not important here, right? Joe Douglas is the guy that's important. The Jets are important. I think they're maybe thinking offensive weapon, wide receiver, though, specifically, compared to offensive line. So that's just kind of the sense I get a week before the draft. I don't know. We'll see. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Thanks so much. And as always, go Jets.